When was the last time you sat down, alone, in silence, and asked yourself a truly honest question? Not a comfortable one, not an easy one, but a question that made your chest feel heavy. A question like, why am I not where I want to be? Because most people never ask that question. And that is exactly why most people never change. And that is exactly why you are here today. Which means something is already different about you, because you chose to press play. And that small decision might be the beginning of something that changes everything. Welcome to English to Inspire, the channel where we learn English and we learn how to think, how to grow, and how to build a life that actually means something. One story at a time, one word at a time, one honest conversation at a time. If this is your first time here, I want you to know that this is not just a language channel. This is a place where real things are said, where we talk about fire and pain and hunger and dreams, because those are the words that matter. Those are the feelings that move people forward. And if you feel that this place is for you, then do one small thing right now and subscribe, because what is coming will be worth every minute of your time. Today we are talking about a man who lived for 99 years and spent almost every single one of those days reading, thinking, and getting better. A man who was not the loudest in the room, not the most charming, not the one with the biggest smile, but he was almost always the smartest. And not because he was born that way, but because he made a decision very early in his life that most people never make. The decision to become a learning machine, to treat knowledge like food, like oxygen, like something he could not survive without. And that man is Charlie Munger. Now, you might not know his name as well as you know his partner, Warren Buffett. But people who truly understand wealth, people who truly understand thinking, they know that behind one of the greatest financial minds in history stood another mind that was just as sharp, maybe sharper. And the story of how Charlie Munger built that mind is the story we are going to live together today. And it is not just a story about money. It is a story about discipline and pain and patience and the kind of hunger that does not go away when you eat. The kind that grows the more you feed it. So ask yourself, right now, and be honest, are you feeding your mind every day? Are you treating your own growth like it is urgent? Like the clock is running? Because it is. The clock is always running. And somewhere out there, another version of you, the version that said yes to knowledge and no to comfort, is already ahead. And the question is not whether that person exists. The question is whether you are willing to become them. Charlie Munger was born on January 1st, 1924, in Omaha, Nebraska. And if you know anything about that time in American history, you know that the world he was born into was not kind. It was not soft. It was not full of options and opportunities the way the world tries to sell itself to you today, because the Great Depression was coming. Money was disappearing from families overnight. Fathers who had worked their whole lives were suddenly standing in lines just to get bread. And the word security became something people whispered about like a dream they were afraid to believe in. And it was inside that world, inside that pressure, inside that scarcity, that a young Charlie Munger began to understand something that most people only learn much later in life, if they learn it at all, which is that the world does not owe you anything, not comfort, not fairness, not success. And the sooner you accept that truth, the sooner you can start building something real. He grew up in a modest home, and from a very early age he worked, not because someone forced him to, but because work was simply what people did. It was the language of survival. And one of his most famous early jobs was at a grocery store owned by Warren Buffett's grandfather, which is one of those small details that history loves to hide inside ordinary moments. Because neither of those boys knew then what they would one day build together. And that is something worth thinking about, because right now you are also living inside an ordinary moment that might be the beginning of something extraordinary. And the question is whether you are paying attention. What the Depression taught Charlie, what that era of hunger and discipline carved into the bones of an entire generation, was a set of values that the modern world is desperately trying to forget. Values like patience and delayed gratification, and the understanding that what you want and what you deserve are two completely different things, and that the distance between those two things is filled with work, with time, with failure, and with a kind of quiet persistence that does not look heroic from the outside but is absolutely heroic on the inside. Charlie's father was a lawyer, and that world of logic and argument and careful thinking was present in his home. So, from a very young age, he was surrounded by the idea that words matter, that structure matters, that how you think about a problem determines whether you can solve it. And he absorbed all of that, like a sponge, quietly, consistently, building a foundation that most people never build because they are too busy chasing things that feel good right now instead of building things that last. He eventually went to study mathematics at the University of Michigan, then left to serve in the United States Army Air Corps during World War II, studying meteorology, learning how to read patterns in nature, how to predict, how to prepare, how to think about systems. And even then, even in the middle of a world war, Charlie Munger was becoming the kind of thinker who would one day change how the world understood wealth and wisdom, and the fire that built him was never comfort. It was always pressure, always scarcity, always the quiet understanding that if you want something real, you have to become someone real first. There is a question that Charlie Munger asked himself almost every single day of his adult life. And it is a question so simple that it almost sounds like it cannot be powerful. But when you sit with it, when you really let it land, it changes the way you see everything. And that question is this: what do I still not know? And how is that ignorance hurting me right now? Because Charlie understood something that very few people ever truly understand, which is that what you do not know is not neutral. It is not harmless. It is not just empty space sitting quietly in the corner of your mind. It is actively working against you every single day, shaping your decisions, limiting your choices, closing doors you cannot even see because you do not know they exist. And that understanding, that almost uncomfortable awareness of his own ignorance, is what drove Charlie Munger to read with an intensity and a consistency that most people reserve for things like entertainment or distraction. From the time he was a young man, Charlie read everything he could find. And when people ask what kind of books he read, the answer is almost funny in how broad it is. Because he did not read just business books. He did not read just law books. He read science and history and biography and psychology and mathematics and philosophy. Because he believed that the world is not divided into separate subjects the way schools teach it. The world is one connected system. And if you only understand one piece of it, you will always be confused by the rest. And that belief shaped everything about how he thought, how he talked, how he made decisions, and ultimately how he built one of the most impressive minds of the 20th century. He once said that in his whole life, he had never known a wise person who did not read all the time. And when you hear that, you might nod your head and think, yes, reading is important. I know that. But knowing something and doing something are two completely different universes. And the honest question you need to ask yourself right now is not whether you believe in reading, but whether your daily life actually reflects that belief. Because belief without action is just a comfortable story you tell yourself, while the clock keeps running and the gap between you and the life you want keeps growing. Charlie called himself a learning machine. And that phrase is worth sitting with for a moment, because a machine does not wait for motivation. A machine does not say, I will start on Monday. A machine does not check how it feels before it does its job. A machine runs consistently, reliably, day after day. And that is exactly how Charlie approached his own education. Not as something fun or optional or reserved for when he had extra time, but as a non-negotiable part of his existence. As fundamental as eating or sleeping. Because in his mind, a brain that was not being fed new ideas was a brain that was slowly dying. Now, think about your own life. Think about yesterday specifically. Think about how many hours went into your phone, into shows, into conversations that went nowhere. And then think about how many hours went into something that made you genuinely sharper, genuinely more capable, genuinely closer to the person you say you want to become. And if that honest count makes you uncomfortable, then good. Because discomfort is the first honest signal that change is not just possible, but necessary. And the beautiful thing about what Charlie Munger proved is that it is never about how much time you have. It is always about what you decide to do with the time that is already there, waiting every single morning, like a door that only opens from the inside. Imagine for a moment that your mind is not just a brain sitting inside your skull, but a kind of workshop. And inside that workshop, you have tools. And every tool represents a way of thinking, a way of seeing a problem, a way of understanding why something happens the way it happens. And now imagine that most people go through their entire lives with only 2 or 3 tools in that workshop, a hammer and maybe a screwdriver. And so every single problem they face, no matter how different it is, gets treated the same way, gets hit with the same hammer, gets forced into the same solution. Because when you only have one tool, every problem starts to look like a nail. And that image, that simple and almost painful image, is exactly what Charlie Munger spent his entire life trying to fix. Not just in himself, but in everyone around him. Because he believed with total conviction that the quality of your thinking determines the quality of your life. And that most human suffering, most human failure, most human frustration comes not from bad luck, but from bad mental tools. Charlie called his system a latticework of mental models. And that phrase sounds complicated, but the idea behind it is actually beautiful in how practical it is. Because a mental model is simply a way of understanding how something works. It is a framework, a lens, a map that helps you navigate a specific kind of territory. And what Charlie did was collect these models from every field of human knowledge. From physics, he took the idea of critical mass. From biology, he took the idea of ecosystems and how everything is connected. From psychology, he took the understanding of how human beings deceive themselves and each other. From mathematics, he took the power of compound interest, which he called the 8th wonder of the world. And he wove all of these ideas together into one single way of thinking that was richer and more powerful than any one field could ever produce on its own. Now, here is the real talk moment. Because this is the part where most people nod and say, that sounds interesting, and then go back to doing exactly what they were doing before. But I want you to stop and actually feel what this means for your life right now. Because you are not just learning English in this moment. You are learning how to think, and those two things together, language and thought, are the most powerful combination a human being can possess. Because language is how you access other people's thinking. It is the door into every book ever written, every idea ever recorded, every lesson ever learned by someone who came before you and paid a price so that you would not have to. Charlie used to say that you need to know the big ideas from the big disciplines, and you need to use them regularly, not just remember them for a test and then forget them, but actually apply them to real situations, to real decisions, to real problems in your real life. Because knowledge that sits unused is not really knowledge. It is just information. And information without application is like having a map and refusing to walk. And the world is full of people carrying maps they never use. Full of people who read something once and felt inspired for an afternoon and then went back to sleep. The most important thing Charlie Munger taught the world about thinking is that you must always be asking why. Not once, not twice, but deeply, persistently, uncomfortably. Because the first answer you get to any question is almost never the real answer. It is just the surface. And underneath the surface is where the real understanding lives, where the real power is, where the real solutions wait for the person who is patient enough and hungry enough to keep digging. And that hunger, that refusal to accept the easy answer, is not something you are born with or not born with. It is something you choose every single day, starting right now. There is something that people almost always get wrong about success. And it is one of the most expensive mistakes a person can make. Because it costs not just money, but years, sometimes decades, sometimes an entire lifetime. And that mistake is believing that success is a solo journey. That the truly great ones got there alone. That strength means needing no one. That asking for help or choosing your companions carefully is somehow a weakness rather than one of the most important strategic decisions you will ever make in your life. And Charlie Munger understood this with a clarity that very few people reach, because Charlie Munger had Warren Buffett, and Warren Buffett had Charlie Munger. And what those two men built together over more than 50 years is not just a financial empire worth hundreds of billions of dollars. It is a living proof that the right partnership, built on the right values, with the right kind of mutual respect and intellectual honesty, can produce something so much larger than either person could have ever produced alone. They met in 1959 at a dinner party in Omaha, and the story goes that the conversation between them was so immediate, so electric, so full of the kind of energy that happens when two minds that are truly compatible finally find each other, that the people around them almost disappeared, and both men walked away from that dinner knowing that something important had just happened. Not a business deal, not a transaction, but a recognition, the kind of deep recognition that says, I see how you think, and I respect it completely. And that kind of recognition is rarer than money, rarer than talent, rarer than almost anything the world tells you to chase. What made their partnership so extraordinary was not that they always agreed, because they did not. Charlie was famous for pushing back on Warren, for saying things like that is the most ridiculous idea I've ever heard, with a directness that most people would find uncomfortable, but that Warren described as one of the most valuable things in his life, because Charlie never told Warren what he wanted to hear. Charlie told Warren what he needed to hear. And in a world full of people who will smile and agree and flatter you into making terrible decisions, having one single person who will be brutally honest with you is worth more than 1,000 people who will applaud everything you do. Think about the people in your life right now. Think about who is around you every single day. Think about the conversations you are having, the ideas being shared, the standards being set by the people closest to you. Because Charlie Munger said something about this that is so direct, it almost hurts. He said that the best thing a human being can do is to help another human being know more. And the worst thing you can do is surround yourself with people who make you comfortable in your ignorance. People who never challenge you, never push you, never hold you to a standard higher than where you already are. Because those people are not your friends. They are just comfortable furniture in a life that is slowly going nowhere. Charlie and Warren did not build Berkshire Hathaway in a hurry. They built it with patience, with discipline, with a shared philosophy that said we will only do things we truly understand. We will wait as long as we need to, wait for the right opportunity. We will say no 1,000 times so that when we say yes, it actually means something. And that philosophy, that quiet and almost stubborn commitment to doing things right rather than doing things fast, is available to you right now, not as a business strategy, but as a way of living, a way of choosing, a way of becoming the kind of person whose yes means everything because their no means everything too. There is a way of thinking that most people never discover, and the ones who do discover it almost always describe the moment they found it as one of the most important moments of their intellectual life, because it flips something inside your brain. It reverses the direction of your thinking in a way that suddenly makes problems that seemed impossibly complicated look almost simple. And Charlie Munger called this tool inversion. And the idea behind it is so elegant that once you understand it, you will start seeing it everywhere. In business, in relationships, in health, in learning, in every single area of life where human beings struggle and fail and wonder why things are not working. Because the core of inversion is this. Instead of asking, how do I succeed? You ask, how do I avoid failing? Instead of asking, what should I do to get what I want? You ask, what would guarantee that I never get what I want? And then you make absolutely sure you do not do those things. And what sounds like a small shift in perspective is actually a complete transformation in how you approach every challenge in your life. Charlie used to say that he never tried to be brilliant. He only tried to be consistently non-stupid. And when you first hear that, it almost sounds like he is being modest. But he was not being modest at all. He was being precise. Because he understood something about human failure that most people miss completely. Which is that The majority of catastrophic outcomes in life do not come from a lack of brilliance. They come from a handful of completely predictable, completely avoidable mistakes that human beings make over and over again because they are too proud or too impatient or too emotionally attached to their own ideas to see clearly. An inversion is the tool that cuts through all of that noise and shows you exactly where the danger is hiding before it destroys you. Think about how you approach your own goals right now. Think about the last time you made a plan, because the chances are very high that your plan was a list of things you were going to do, a list of positive actions, a list of steps forward, and there is nothing wrong with that. But Charlie would sit down with that same goal and ask a completely different question. He would ask, what are all the ways this could go terribly wrong? What are all the mistakes a person in my position would be most likely to make? What are the habits, the attitudes, the decisions that would guarantee my failure? And then he would build his entire strategy around avoiding those things first. Because he knew that if you can eliminate the most common causes of failure, you do not need to be a genius to succeed. You just need to be consistent and clear and honest with yourself about where the real risks actually live. Now bring this into your English learning, because this is not abstract philosophy. This is a practical tool you can use today. And the inversion question for your learning journey sounds like this. What would guarantee that I never improve my English? And the answers come fast, and they come honest. Never practicing speaking because I am afraid of making mistakes. Consuming content only in my native language because it is more comfortable. Studying for 1 week and then stopping for 3 because I lost motivation. Treating every error as evidence that I am not capable, instead of treating it as data that shows me exactly where to focus next. And every single one of those answers is a mirror, a direct and uncomfortable mirror that shows you not some hypothetical failure, but the exact patterns that might already be present in your life. Right now, Charlie Munger proved with his entire existence that wisdom is not about having all the answers. It is about being disciplined enough to avoid the most destructive questions, patient enough to wait while others rush, honest enough to see your own weaknesses before they become your destiny. And the moment you start using inversion, the moment you make it a daily habit to ask not just where do I want to go, but what would stop me from ever getting there, is the moment your thinking becomes sharper, your decisions become cleaner, and the path forward becomes something you can actually see with your own eyes. There is a kind of pain that nobody talks about, honestly, not in motivational videos, not in business books, not in the carefully edited stories that successful people tell about their lives when they are standing on stages with lights on their faces and applause in their ears. And that is the pain that does not build character in a clean and cinematic way, but instead sits on your chest for months, for years, heavy and silent and relentless. The kind of pain that makes you question not just your plans, but your identity. Not just what you are doing, but who you are and whether any of it means anything at all. And Charlie Munger knew that pain. He knew it personally. He knew it in his body and in his heart and in the quiet moments of his life that no biography can fully capture. Because Charlie Munger lost his 9-year-old son Teddy to leukemia. And if you are a parent, you already know that there are no words for that. And if you are not a parent, I want you to understand that there is no loss on this earth that compares to the loss of a child. And Charlie carried that weight. He carried it, and he kept going. Not because he was made of stone, not because he did not feel it, but because he understood something about pain that most people spend their whole lives running from. Before Teddy died, Charlie's first marriage had already ended in divorce, and he was left as a single father trying to rebuild his life professionally while holding together a family emotionally. And the financial pressure during that period was real and heavy, because he was not yet the Charlie Munger the world would come to know. He was just a man in his 30s trying to hold everything together with his bare hands, while the ground kept shifting underneath him. And what he did in that period is what separates the people who eventually rise from the people who stay broken. Because he did not pretend the pain was not there. He did not perform strength for the world. While collapsing privately, he actually processed it. He actually sat with it. He actually let it teach him something about the fragility of life and the absolute necessity of being intentional with the time you are given, because that time can be taken from you without warning and without mercy. Later in his life, Charlie lost the vision in one eye due to a botched cataract surgery, and he handled that loss with a kind of philosophical calm that shocked the people around him, because he simply said that he had read enough about Stoicism and enough about how human beings adapt to know that he would adjust, that the mind is more flexible than we give it credit for. That suffering is real, but suffering is also temporary in the sense that the self is capable of reorganizing around loss and finding new ways to function, new ways to see, new ways to move forward. And that capacity, that almost stubborn human capacity to reorganize and continue, is something Charlie Munger embodied more completely than almost anyone of his generation. Real talk. No. Because this is the part of the story that I need you to hear, not just with your ears, but with whatever it is inside you that has been using your own pain as a reason to stop, as an excuse to wait, as evidence that the universe has singled you out for difficulty. Because it has not. Pain is not personal. Pain is the price of being alive and caring about things, and every single person you admire, every single person whose life looks clean and successful from the outside, has a private collection of losses that would bring you to your knees if you knew the full story. And the question is never whether the pain will come. The question is always what you decide to do on the days when it is sitting on your chest, and the clock is still running, and the world still needs what only you can give it. There is a word that the modern world has declared almost dangerous. A word that self-help culture has tried to replace with more comfortable alternatives. A word that makes people feel guilty when they use it because somewhere along the way the world decided that wanting everything and saying yes to everything was a sign of ambition and passion and aliveness. But Charlie Munger looked at that idea with the same quiet intensity. He looked at every bad idea and he rejected it completely, because that word is no. And Charlie Munger believed with every fiber of his extraordinary mind that the ability to say no, clearly, consistently, without apology and without lengthy explanation, is one of the rarest and most powerful skills a human being can develop. Because every yes you give to something that does not deserve it is a no you are secretly giving to something that does. And most people never feel that trade because they never stop moving long enough to do the honest math of their own time and energy and attention. Charlie was famous in the investment world for the speed and the clarity with which he rejected ideas. And people who brought proposals to Berkshire Hathaway used to say that Charlie could find the fatal flaw in a business plan faster than anyone they had ever encountered. Not because he was negative or cynical or afraid of risk, but because he had spent decades training himself to see clearly, to cut through the excitement and the optimism and the beautiful projections and ask the one question that mattered most, which is what is wrong with this? Because he knew that a great opportunity does not need you to lower your standards to accept it. A truly great opportunity can survive your hardest questions, and anything that cannot survive your hardest questions is not an opportunity. It is a trap wearing the costume of an opportunity, and the world is absolutely full of those traps, and they are waiting for people who have not yet learned to say no. Think about your own life, and be ruthlessly honest for just one moment. Think about how many things you have said yes to in the last month that you knew in your gut were not right. Commitments you made because you felt guilty saying no. Projects you accepted because you were afraid of missing out. Relationships you maintained out of habit rather than genuine value. Habits you kept feeding because stopping them required a confrontation with yourself that felt too uncomfortable to have. And now think about what all of those yeses cost you. Not in money necessarily, but in time, in focus, in energy, in the slow erosion of your own standards. It happens every single time you betray what you know is right. Because the moment made saying yes feel easier than saying no. Charlie Munger sat on very few corporate boards compared to someone of his stature and influence. He read for hours, every single day, while other people his age and his wealth were filling their calendars with meetings and events and appearances. He kept his life deliberately simple and deliberately focused because he understood that complexity is the enemy of excellence, that the more things you try to do, the less well you do any of them. and that the most productive thing a person can do on any given day is often not to add something new, but to remove something that is stealing space from what actually matters. The discipline of no is not a personality trait that some people are born with and others are not. It is a muscle, and like every muscle, it grows when you use it, and it atrophies when you avoid it. And the first no is always the hardest, because it requires you to believe that your time and your attention and your energy are worth protecting, that you are worth protecting, and that the discomfort of disappointing someone in the short term is a price worth paying for the integrity and the focus that you get to keep in the long term. And Charlie Munger lived that truth every single day of his long and remarkable life. And the results of that discipline are written in every decision he ever made and every achievement he ever built. There is a difference between being intelligent and being wise, and it is not a small difference. It is not a subtle difference. It is a canyon. It is a vast and humbling distance that separates people who are brilliant from people who are actually good at living. And Charlie Munger spent most of his public life trying to explain that difference to anyone who would listen, because he watched his entire career as highly intelligent people with elite educations and sharp minds and impressive credentials, destroyed themselves and their careers and their relationships through a small collection of entirely predictable psychological traps that had nothing to do with IQ and everything to do with ego, with envy, with the inability to sit quietly with uncertainty, with a desperate human need to feel right even when being right is destroying you. And Charlie named these traps. He cataloged them. He studied them with the same intensity he studied everything else, because he believed that knowing how human psychology fails is just as important as knowing anything else, maybe more important, because your mind is the instrument you use to process everything else in your life. And if that instrument is missing, then nothing you build with it will ever be as strong as it could be. One of the traps Charlie talked about most was envy, and he was direct about it in a way that most people find uncomfortable, because he said that envy is the stupidest of the deadly sins. Not the most dramatic, not the most destructive in the spectacular sense, but the stupidest, because at least with other vices, you get something. You get pleasure, you get excitement, you get some kind of temporary reward. But envy gives you nothing except pain. It makes you feel worse about your own life, not because your life has gotten worse, but because someone else's life has gotten better. And it poisons your ability to think clearly and work consistently and appreciate what you are actually building. Because you are too busy measuring yourself against someone else's highlight reel instead of your own genuine progress. Charlie also talked endlessly about the danger of ego, about the way that smart people in particular fall in love with their own thinking, become so attached to their own conclusions that they stop being able to update them when new information arrives. And he called this one of the most expensive habits a person can have, because the world is always changing. Reality is always revealing new information, and the person who cannot change their mind when the evidence changes is not a person of strong conviction. They are a person of dangerous rigidity. And dangerous rigidity in business costs money. In relationships, it costs connection. In learning, it costs growth. And in life, it costs the kind of wisdom that only comes to people who stay humble enough to keep being students, no matter how much they already know. Now think about where ego is showing up in your own journey, because this is real talk, and it deserves a real answer. Think about whether you are avoiding speaking English because you are afraid of sounding foolish. Think about whether you are holding on to a belief about yourself, a story like I am not smart enough, or I started too late, or people like me do not succeed. Think about whether that story is based on evidence, or whether it is based on ego protecting itself from the risk of trying and failing publicly. Because Charlie Munger would tell you that the willingness to be a fool in public, to make mistakes visibly, to be wrong and admit it, and adjust, and try again, is not weakness. It is the absolute foundation of genuine learning. And genuine learning is the only thing that separates the person you are today from the person you are capable of becoming. Wisdom, the real kind. The kind that Charlie Munger carried in his bones after 99 years of reading and thinking and failing and adjusting, is not about having more answers than everyone else. It is about being more honest than everyone else. Honest about what you do not know, Honest about where your thinking might be flawed. Honest about the gap between who you are and who you are trying to become. And that honesty, that daily practice of looking at yourself without flinching, is the most uncomfortable and the most liberating thing a human being can choose to do. And it is available to you right now, today, in this moment, if you are brave enough to choose it. Charlie Munger read his last book at 99 years old, and I want you to sit with that for a moment, not as a statistic, not as an interesting biographical detail, but as a direct challenge to every excuse you have ever made about not having enough time, not being in the right place, not having the right resources, not being the right age, not being ready yet, because he was a man who had lived through the Great Depression and a world war and the death of his own child and the loss of his vision and the end of a marriage. A man who had every reason the world would accept as valid to sit down and rest and say, I have done enough. And instead he picked up another book, and then another, and then another, because he never confused being alive with actually living. He never mistook the passage of time for the building of wisdom. He never allowed the comfort that his wealth could have bought him to replace the hunger that his mind still carried. And that hunger, that beautiful and relentless and deeply human hunger, to know more and think better and understand deeper, is the real inheritance he left to the world. Not the billions of dollars, not the famous partnership, not the legendary investment record, but the simple and devastating proof that a human mind, in love with learning, is one of the most powerful forces that has ever existed on this earth. Everything we have walked through together today, the boy from Omaha shaped by scarcity and discipline, the learning machine who read across every field of human knowledge, the architect of mental models who saw the world as one connected system, the partner who chose depth over popularity and honesty over comfort, the strategic thinker who used inversion to avoid failure before chasing success, the man who carried real pain and kept walking, the disciplined voice who said no when the whole world was saying yes, the wise soul who chose honesty over ego and learning over the illusion of already knowing enough. All of it points to one single truth that is so simple it almost disappears inside its own simplicity, which is that the quality of your life is determined by the quality of your thinking. And the quality of your thinking is determined by what you choose to put into your mind every single day. And that choice, that daily, unglamorous, deeply important choice, belongs entirely to you and to nobody else. So now, I am talking directly to you, not to the idea of you, not to some future version of you that has already figured everything out, but to you right now, in whatever room you are sitting in whatever city you are living in, with whatever circumstances are currently surrounding you. Because the story of Charlie Munger is not a story about a genius who is different from you in some fundamental and unbridgeable way. It is a story about a person who decided, early and often and consistently, to take his own mind seriously, to treat his own growth as urgent, to never accept the comfortable lie that tomorrow is a better time to start than today. And that decision is available to you right now, in this moment, with exactly the resources you currently have, because you do not need more time. You need more intention. You do not need better circumstances. You need a clearer decision. You do not need the world to change around you. You need to change what you do inside the world that already exists. Your mind is the only asset that grows every single time you use it, that compounds quietly and relentlessly, the way Charlie always said. The best things in life compound, slowly at first, and then in ways that shock everyone who is not paying attention. And the English you are building right now, word by word, idea by idea, conversation by conversation, is not just a language skill. It is a key. It is a door. It is access to every book and every idea and every conversation that the greatest minds in human history have left behind for the person who is hungry enough to come and find them. The world is not waiting for someone perfect. It is not waiting for someone ready. It is not waiting for someone who has eliminated all doubt and fear and uncertainty. It is waiting for someone who decides to move anyway, someone who chooses growth over comfort and action, over hesitation and hunger over the slow and painless death of a life half lived. Do not let it wait any longer. The clock is running. Your mind is ready. Now, go.